Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Who dares awaken me from my slumber? William White. Yes, this must mean it is time for the North American Dogman Project science team to get involved here on Midnight Lycanthropy on StarFox Radio. Yet please allow me to feed. Absolutely delicious. And thank you to everyone who is getting ready to indulge this information that William is going to share with us. So without further notice, it is time for the Midnight Society to take a walk into the darkness. My creatures of the night, yes, welcome back to another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. We again, as previously mentioned, have William White, the official geologist of the North American Dogman Project. Yes, science time. And I do like to deal with science here as much as possible, and the audience should know that we try to stack up our science team on here. So again, this is what we're going to be doing tonight, except we are going to pick William's brain about the Cynocephali. How you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm pretty busy, like I was previously stating to you, just linking up with you here for a few. Just got the squirrel to bed, and then I need to do a nice little fantasy family and friend league for a bit after draft.
Cool. Very cool.
What else you been doing in the Dogman land? Anything interesting, or have you heard anything? Or
I haven't heard too much. I mean, we've been getting a few screenshots and trail camera pictures of things, but in the day of AI, that stuff gets a little confusing and a little tricky to suss out. So, we're kind of being extra careful about what we attribute to an actual dogman or cryptid and what may just be creative license.
straight up preach, my friend. And I'm not one to ever, directly throw shade on anybody, but there is way too many content creators out there where it's sickening that just continuously put out things as a quote unquote dogman video, and you click on it, you're like, oh my goodness, this is just so cringe, barf, and it's so pathetically fake. And also, just in general, maybe you can answer this for me. I think the trail cam people need to step their camera game up, man. All these trail cams, even if it's a legit image, literally looks like they put a carrot in there and decided that was going to be the electronical device to snap images.
Yeah, it's really strange that especially the trail cams that tend to catch Bigfoot, Dogman, Mothman, whatever. They seem so low resolution. In this day and age, you'd figure everyone's got some super HD camera equipment because it's not expensive. So I don't know what the story is with all that. But of course, a lot of the pictures, do happen at night, and the night vision setting, I get why that is a lower resolution. But yeah, it is what it is. So The classic story, you know, anytime someone takes a picture of Bigfoot, it's with the absolute lowest resolution camera possible.
Yeah, it's like they went to the fridge and just go peeled the potato and hey, let's go right now. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I have a brand new iPhone, okay? And I do everything from my iPhone. It's dark outside right now, out my back window. But if I was to open my window, okay, and remove the screen because obviously those things are going to kind of distort things. But if I was just to take a picture of the darkness and I thought something was there, I could then take that photo and put it through editors and change the contrast and brightness.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to see definition and such. So again, it's just funny, like I had mentioned to you, how pathetic trail camera imagery really is.
Well, and kind of going back to the whole AI thing, that's where AI really shines. You know, there's all sorts of AI software nowadays where you can do just that. You can put in, you know, something that looks extremely dark and you just can't really tell what's going on, but the AI can detect the slight differences in pixels, and then what it's going to do is basically connect the dots. It's going to create an image that makes sense, and it won't always be accurate, but it can really, I mean, I've seen incredible things that people have done with like old movies where, you know, background images are like super blurry, hard to see. The lighting's really poor on a particular area, and they run it through an AI, and boom, it's like, you know, night and day, modern looking. You can see exactly maybe what the producer or the filmographer was trying to hide. I don't know, but you know, that is the where I think AI processing of photographs and video might actually help us one day. So.
100%, man. Preach. And I think, again, people don't understand how simple it is. Okay. So, say you have a real trail camera image. You could send that to me, right? And you
Yep.
know what I can easily do? I go in, I open up my programs, I start taking my eraser, right? And I erase everything out of the image except for the time frame, the stamp, whether it's Cabela, etc. So it's still the frame now of a trail cam picture. A portion of this is true, but then I can easily now go in and I have so many different apps where I can create an AI, then put it through an old Polaroid effect, do all these things, right? Darken it up because now when the other one you sent me was black in the background too, that black now perfectly matches in. And then you just take the frame and there you go. You got a trail cam stamp time frame from Cabela's where someone's like, oh, this is a real trail cam image. But I just explained how it can be done.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why it is so difficult these days to just go, oh, wow, I saw a picture, or even I saw a video on the internet. It must be true. It has reached the point where it's going to take a lot more digging to determine if something's genuine or not. And I mean, we're still just barely scratching the surface of that for sure.
Yeah, it's like, correct me if I'm wrong before we dive into the Cynocephali. There was a zoo, I believe it was down in Florida, that supposedly put out that video of it was a dogman or a skinwalker or a werewolf outside of the zoo, just miraculously on this trail camera.
Mm-hmm. Goofy
And
looking little thing too. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So as far as I know, nothing's ever been able to definitively prove fake or etc. But it's just really odd that at that point in time there was like a promo kind of coming up for there was just all kinds of things that just it's like they were trying to get some sort of publicity for their zoo.
And there's always stuff like that too, where yeah, I mean, shoot, I'm old enough to remember the Blair Witch Project and some of those more indie films, you know, and they would go through an entire guerrilla marketing campaign to, you know, really get the grassroots excited and thinking about this topic. Yeah, exactly. That stuff's been going on for probably before I was born, but definitely since I was a teenager, you know.
It's beautiful that you mentioned that because also again that was one of the first things that I feel like kind of started pressing the purposeful hoax aspect because when that movie first came out, nobody said anything about it, and everyone was going around talking like it was actually some sort of
Oh, I remember.
documentary. Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
remember kids in middle school and high school. Yeah, they were certain that this was the real deal. Yeah.
so again, it was something kind of along the lines of purposely trying to control the narrative, almost to the extent of the hoax. The only reason they finally even admitted it is because people on the staff that actually worked on it came forward, et cetera, to say, be like, no, this is based off of some sort of lore, but it had nothing to do with it.
Just one more thing before we get on topic. There was a horror gore movie that came out, I believe, in the early '80s called Cannibal Holocaust, and it had such horrific and realistic looking scenes of mayhem, that they were actually investigated, I believe, by the Italian police. And the crazy thing about it was that the cast was actually, they signed an NDA and basically an agreement to disappear for like 6 or 7 months after the release of the film. Yeah. So I mean, this stuff's been going on forever, and that takes some dedication, and that created this whole mythos that still to this day people will talk about. Hey, was that really a snuff film or not?
That's so funny, but so twisted, man. So to my audience, just be aware, okay? We just literally showed examples of big time productions that are trying to control the narrative. So just because someone on YouTube is posting things, there's more narrative control there on your YouTube. A lot easier to keep a secrecy than in a large production such as that. So tonight, though, I wanted to toss you the mic right now, my friend, and see what you could maybe dig up on the Cynocephali. I mean, I know enough about it, but I think you know more.
So tonight's topic, predates AI and guerrilla marketing campaigns by a good, at least 3,000 years. So we're talking about the Cynocephali, which is Greek for dog-headed people. And the Cynocephali, I mean, they pop up and are referenced. Now, it may be an allegory, it may be a metaphor, but by multiple cultures throughout multiple periods of time, going back, like I said, to the Greeks, to ancient India, all the way through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, in Marco Polo. I mean, they pop up all over the place. And what it is, it varies, of course, depending on what the culture it comes from. But it is anything from something with a human body and a dog's head to basically straight up a fur-covered Dogman individual. Now, they in almost all cases, they differ from at least our modern understanding of Dogman in the fact that pretty much all of these references refer to them wearing clothing of some sort, anything from like animal skins to foliage, leaves, to actual like cloth, textile fabric. So, that indicates that they, were purported to have a much higher level of civilization than the modern Dogman that we suspect operates in small packs, oftentimes individually, although lots of people say if you see one, you didn't see the other 2 or 3 that were with them. I don't know if that's true or not. But the Cynocephali differ greatly in the fact that multiple ancient cultures refer to them having cities, languages, communicating with each other, and dog barks and clicks and whistles. So we may be dealing with something different, or it's possible that the Cynocephali civilization somehow collapsed, and what we're seeing today as Dogmen are somehow, kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Fallout, the post-apocalypse survivors, right? Having lost pretty much all of their civilization and society. I don't know. It's just one of the theories that I've had about it. Some of the cool stories that are often referenced and perhaps very much more well known. I'll start with Saint Christopher. So a lot of us are familiar with Saint Christopher. He's both an Orthodox and a Catholic saint. I actually have a strong affinity towards the Orthodox Church, though I'm not Orthodox, but I'm not Catholic. And if I remember right, he is a saint that looks over travelers and safety and protection and such. And anyway, in a lot of early Orthodox iconography, and iconography are the very distinct, colorful, I believe, beautiful religious paintings that the Orthodox Church puts out of their saints and, stories from the Bible and whatever. So in a lot of the early iconography, St. Christopher is depicted as having a dog's head and sometimes, more dog-like features. And according to some of the early accounts of who he was actually apparently kind of drafted into the Roman military as part of the numerus marmitarium, or the unit of the Marmitari, basically it's like an auxiliary unit, skirmishers, not the legion that marches orderly with all their armor and shields and spears, but kind of, mercenary or barbarian allies of the Romans. And apparently he was part of an entire unit of dog-headed people, and was then later on baptized into the Christian church by a bishop, and then later on was martyred for his faith. So that's an interesting story that I think will hit home with millions of people, because I know that there's hundreds of millions of Catholics out there and tens of millions of Eastern Orthodox out there. Now, it is quite possible that all of this is due to a mistranslation of Latin. So if we're familiar with the Bible and the Old Testament, we're familiar with the land of Canaan and the Canaanites. The Latin word for dog is canine, right? We're all familiar with that word. And so it's possible that the word cananius was mistranslated through the annals of time and history into which Cananius would be Canaanite, someone originating from the land of Canaan, basically the Holy Land, the Levant, was confused with the term caninus, which of course is dog, which takes some of the fun out of it. It's a possible explanation, but I don't know. I like the story of a dog-headed mercenary being baptized into the church and then becoming a martyr and a saint. I personally like that version of it myself. So, and there's a couple others from other Orthodox. So for those who aren't familiar, there's a branch of the Orthodox Church in Egypt called the Coptic Christian Church. And they have a couple dog-headed saints, Saint Arachas and Saint Agani. They are depicted in ancient iconography as exactly described with dog heads. I don't have a whole lot on their story. But those are, relatively more recent ones. They're going back to, like I said, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Indian, not Native American, but subcontinent Indian peoples. There are myriads of stories about encountering, fighting with, sometimes fighting alongside, as mercenaries, dog-headed people who used weapons, spears, swords, fought ferociously, were much larger than humans, and were very valued or feared, depending on what side of the battle you were on, for them, for their traits. So there was even, there's a Greek story of, I think his name was Justin and the Argonauts. Is that right? Might have gotten his name wrong, but the Argonauts. They fought at least according to their story, a legendary battle against a tribe of Cynocephali in probably the Balkans, somewhere around Serbia. So that's another example of them popping up in history, or at least in legend. Because once you get back that far, a lot of these stories, it's hard to differentiate between legend and history. But it comes about a lot, and surprisingly, now to play the devil's advocate, so to speak, with this, it does pop up a lot in ancient Christianity, in the early Catholic Church, and it could be a metaphor for like a pagan, a non-believer, being like a barbarian, a subhuman, an animal, and then when they accept, Christ and the gospel, then they lose their doggish nature and become, a whole human being, and to have the appearance of a man. That is something that some of these stories that's how I'm interpreting them, but that doesn't explain the Greeks. It doesn't explain the Indians. It doesn't explain Marco Polo, who, when he made his famous trek across Europe and Asia to China on the Silk Road, he encountered Cynocephali in the mountains of northern India, Pakistan, and described them as, fierce, ferocious beings who communicated to each other in barks and clicks and whistles. So, I don't know, but I do think it's fascinating, and I do think that it is possible that it has some connection to the phenomenon that we are experiencing today in the wilderness, in our backyards, in some cases, with the Dogman. What's your feeling and thoughts on that?
That is all some excellent stuff right there. And I had heard of some of that, but also a lot of new information, which is good. And yeah, Jason and the Argonauts
Jason, that was it.
Yep. Yeah, definitely some epic stuff right there. And well, I guess what I would say is let's just remove that part potentially because, like you said, I guess it could have been a misidentification, misinterpretation. Okay, so let's just remove that for a second. Well, how did Herodotus end up speaking to Alexander the Great, and how did he, see these things? How did Marco Polo? So even without the Saint Christopher and that aspect, where like you said, it could be a misinterpretation. Why are they still described as people that weren't even involved? Correct me if I'm wrong. At the point in time when Alexander the Great reported seeing that, was the Bible even written at that point in time?
No. I mean, so Alexander the Great, he existed in the BC period. So some of the books of the Septuagint, the Old Testament, existed, though I don't know that they had been necessarily compiled into a single, unit like the Bible or the Old Testament or the Torah, as the Jews refer to it. But he certainly wouldn't be reading it as a Greek, still in their pagan, era. They're, worshiping Zeus and the whole pantheon. Absolutely not.
Exactly, right there. So if and probably, let's be real, there he's all about like trying to conquer and how basically being amongst the gods, as if you would care to read something like that. You know what I
Sure.
mean? Like, I'm just saying, like with the mind frame of someone that's trying to conquer, I don't really see a piece of paper or something being
No.
of much interest from something, as you said, that's completely outside of their interest realm either.
Right.
And yeah, so right there is interesting. And then again, okay, the Egyptians, correct me if I'm wrong, would they
Yep.
have had access to any sort of Bible references
No,
at this point?
they predate it significantly. I mean, according to the Bible, though there's some, actually a lot of debate on the historicity of it. They did bring in the Israelites, or were they called Israelites at the time? But the descendants of Jacob, um, from Joseph and his 12 brothers and all that, and then eventually, their descendants became slaves to the Israelites, and Moses set them free and all that, right? But there's, like I said, debate as to even whether or not that happened. And certainly the ancient Egyptians, predated those events, and from what I understand, the Jews, the Old Testament, they don't refer to dog-headed men. There were lion-headed men described in some part of the Old Testament, if I remember right, which is very interesting in and of itself. But yeah, no, I guarantee you that whatever legends and myths and mythology and worship that the Egyptians had, it was unique to them. Not influenced at all by any Judeo-Christian stories. So
Bingo. Then again, why do they have Anubis, right?
exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. When what I like the most is when stories corroborate each other, right? So we've got Alexander the Great and Herodotus, and they're in like a couple hundred BC, and they're talking about dog-headed men, Cynocephali, in northern India, because Alexander the Great, for those who don't know, made it all the way there. I mean, he conquered a huge chunk of the ancient world. And then you've got Marco Polo, like 1,600 years later, says the exact same thing in the exact same region. And multiple other accounts. When things back each other up, even if it's an ancient report, an ancient writing, I start to listen a little more.
Again, well spoken. And I just wanted to add a little bit more fuel to the fire with that, because why let's start with the Spartans as well. It's pretty interesting too about how they would send out their young warriors to go battle giant wolves, and just interesting aspects of what were these giant wolves. Were they just generic giant wolves? And that's also right around that region too, where
Hmm.
you said at points in time they would have existed. And sure, if something would have happened to any sort of culture, then maybe that would make sense why the Cynocephali aren't so
Not to
prevalent.
mention the legend of lycanthropy. The word lycanthropy originates from Greece. The original legend of basically the first werewolf was a man who was cursed by one of the gods. It might have been Zeus, and basically forced to turn into a wolf. And if I'm not,
King
mistaken,
Lycan, yeah, for
yeah,
consuming human flesh. Yeah.
right. So yeah, that's an interesting region with just a plethora of fascinating stories, legends, perhaps history to it. Absolutely.
And the reason I bring all that up is just because it's to show that even if we were to remove that part of, like you said, the St. Christopher because of potential misinterpretation, there's still other
Mhm.
stuff that isn't misinterpreted, is quite transparent. And again, at this point in time, what about the people of India that
Mhm.
reported seeing these as well? Would they have been introduced to the biblical aspects of any sort of influence at that point in time as well, or?
Nope. I would say not. I mean, they had their own system, Hinduism and the Bhagavad Vedas and a whole library of you want to go down a crazy road, start looking into what their ancient writings talk about. I mean, Vimanas, which are basically flying craft, perhaps spacecraft, nuclear warfare, a whole race of talking intelligent monkeys that assisted some of their great heroes of legend. It's just they have their own story, right? And yeah, they didn't need any, or use or even have available to them any of the, like I said, Judeo-Christian, especially the Christian stuff, which didn't come about for hundreds more years. So.
Boom. And then two more aspects of Chinese history has depictions of strange jet black paintings with dog looking things with bright red eyes. The Japanese cultures mention it as well. And again, they wouldn't have had any sort of influence from the Bible at that point in time, like, because they also have their own beliefs. So it's just really, really
Mhm.
interesting why all the collaborations. And now let's bring it back to a little bit more modern times, even with the Native Americans, when they were living here way before Westerners and other civilizations tried to encroach. They would have had no introduction to any influence like that as well, but yet they still had very similar depictions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Skinwalker legend, um, the yeah. I mean, all of that stuff is it's just fascinating how, like I said, we see the same type of thing pop up in different areas of the world that, as far as we know, and especially as far as orthodox, not religious, but orthodox science, um, believes had no contact with each other for thousands and thousands of years. It is truly fascinating, and it, in my opinion, corroborates a lot of these stories as being worth looking into and not dismissing.
Again, preach, my friend. And before I let you go, I would like to know, why do you think people in general don't look at the things, everything we just spoke about, as, say, quality evidence? Why is it that things, say, we'll use the Sasquatch field, why the Patterson Gimlin and all these other, footage and the historical aspects of supposedly Ape Canyon, the gentleman being taken away, chewing tobacco, and making the Sasquatch this. Why is all that taken as credible historical references, but yet everyone wants to say the Dogman is a modern phenomenon, which it isn't. It predates all of that.
So I think in part Darwin is to blame. I think it's easier for people to um, believe that a large undiscovered primate like creature exists that, diverged from our genetic past millions of years ago, just like chimpanzees and gorillas and other apes did. I think that's easier for them to justify in their head through science or known science than something that basically they associate with fairy tales and Hollywood movies and horror books. I think that's a huge part of it. The other thing about it, I mean, we could do a whole episode on this, but people don't like to believe what makes them uncomfortable, even if it's called cognitive dissonance, basically. Cognitive dissonance is where you have two facts in your brain, in your mind, that are mutually exclusive. They cannot really coexist, and you still be a logical, rational, reasonable being. And so, eventually there will be a clash, a mental clash, and one will win or the other will win. And so that, that makes people extremely uncomfortable. I know I've been there myself on various topics, and that's a primary reason. That's why you can tell the world, show the world evidence that I don't know, we're being run by a cult elites who want to reduce the population from 8 billion to 500 million, and it may be completely true, but it makes everyone extremely uncomfortable, contradicts a lot of things that they've been brought up to believe since they were children, and so they just reject it regardless of whatever evidence may or may not be presented to them. That's all hyperbole, of course. I don't believe that. That'd be madness. But it's an example. The other thing is, as far as the scientists go, and I know this having been trained by scientists and read lots of scientific literature, is scientists have a huge ego. They have dedicated decades to whatever their field is. Doctors are the same. And they have been indoctrinated by previous generations of scientists or doctors. And so when a young up-and-comer has a crazy new idea that might contradict all previous science that's been published, he gets smacked down. He gets threatened by not getting grants for his research projects, not getting tenure in the university, whatever it is. So he learns to be a good boy, learns to toe the line until he has seniority and respect and has published hundreds of papers. And then maybe he can broach new ideas and topics. But by that point, he's, like I said, been indoctrinated. And so he doesn't take huge leaps that may be accurate, but would totally be a radical paradigm shift. Instead, he takes little tiny, toe steps in the direction that he's maybe curious about, and it can take decades or centuries before anything changes. And that's all based on ego and the hierarchy and pecking order that exists in the university system and in academia. But that was a big answer for a short question. But that's really why I think that that this stuff doesn't get taken more seriously by more people at all levels.
That's an excellent answer, because it's more than, it might sound like a simple question, but for real, because as stated, you yourself have said good science is looking into things and bad science is turning your head to evidence. I mean, we have unknown vocalizations that people such as yourself, Colleen, our environmentalist, the biologist, can't verify. Jody's baffled. We have footprints that yourself, everyone I just mentioned, and Nuxium, our master tracker, who's been all around the world tracking things, is completely baffled, right? You have missing people. You have cave systems that are unexplored. I mean, how much more transparency and scientific evidence is needed?
Well, look, going back to like my background in geology, they have found metal screws, like with threads on them, something that could not occur in nature, in layers, in coal veins, layers of coal, which to form coal takes millions of years, right? So that without a shadow of a doubt means that something was on this earth millions of years ago that had an artificially manufactured screw. And that's just one example. There are multiple of these anomalies that will appear from time to time in the rock. And so that should shake all of our knowledge about the history of the world and flip it on its head and make people start to really literally dig and figuratively dig into what's going on here. And yet, because we have now hundreds of years of established history and established science about how the world was created, how it existed, about humanity's place in it, it just gets pushed off to the side, and you don't research that, you don't look into that, or you will get your funding pulled, your reputation will be destroyed, you'll be like Graham Hancock, or who I personally think is a great researcher, or several of these other scientists who go into the more fringe areas, and only people who have open minds will respect you, and the vast bulk of your colleagues will laugh at you and not take anything you have to say seriously. Yeah, it's wild how the human mind works, how ego works. I mean, it is absolutely something to behold once you can step back and recognize that it's happening,
Seriously, my friend, preach on all that, and that's why I'm super glad to have you part of the North American Dogman Project, part of our science team, and one of my good friends, because I consider you part of the good science out there and the good scientists that are putting out great information. So I always do appreciate you popping in and hanging out with us and allotting some of your time, because you are a busy individual. So it's much appreciated, and keep on being badass, my friend.
Yeah, I always enjoy these talks. I really do. I look forward to them.
Thank you for everyone who once again stopped by tonight for this episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. If you do enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm, and I will catch you very soon.